Good evening, everyone. I'm Allison Schilling, Senior Program Officer at the Concord Museum. It's my pleasure to be the first to welcome everyone to tonight's forum on the new anthology, Now Comes Good Sailing, co-hosted by the Concord Museum and the Thoreau Society. I hope you enjoy the program, and I will now turn over the virtual floor to Mike Frederick, Executive Director of the Thoreau Society.
Thank you, Allison. Excuse me for nearly interrupting you. So it's my honor and privilege to be co-hosting this evening's event with the Concord Museum and Princeton University Press in launching this notable collection of essays by many of today's finest authors. Now Comes Good Sailing. Thank you, Tom Putnam and Allison Schilling of the Concord Museum for making this event possible, and for our upcoming event on Sunday, October 24th, which will be part 2 of our series. I also want to thank Andrew Blauner for having the vision for this collection of timely essays on Thoreau. Tonight, in fact, is the book launch. It first became available today. Andrew, you've worked magic with this book. Finally, we owe everything to Jody Price, Senior Publicist at Princeton, for bringing us together to make these 2 programs possible. Founded in 1941, the Thoreau Society is the largest and oldest organization devoted to an American author. The Society has members from more than 20 countries around the world, the Penobscot Nation, and all 50 US states. The Society exists to stimulate interest in and foster education about Thoreau's life works, legacy, and his place in his world and ours, challenging all to live a deliberate, considered life. Tonight's panel features Jennifer Finney Boylan, Gerald Early, and Jordan Salama. Jennifer, or Jenny Finney Boylan, is the author of 16 books, a trustee of PEN America, and the Anna Quindlen Writer-in-Residence at Barnard College, Columbia University. She writes an opinion page for the New York Times, which appears on the first Wednesday of the month. Her 2003 memoir, She's Not There, A Life in Two Genders, was the first best-selling work by a transgender American. A novelist, memoirist, short story writer, she is also a nationally known advocate for human rights. She lives in New York City and Belgrade Lakes, Maine, with her wife, Dee Dee. They have a son, Sean, and a daughter, Zai. Gerald Early is an award-winning essayist, author, and editor. He has served as a commentator for NPR and is a consultant for multiple documentaries with Ken Burns. Currently, Early is finishing a book about Fisk University. Early is the Merle King Professor of Modern Letters and American and African American Studies Department at Washington University in St. Louis, where he has taught since 1982. He is completing a book with his daughter, Rosalind, a professional writer and editor, about African American festival in Philadelphia called Odundi, one of the largest Black street festivals in the country and the biggest public event for adherents of Yoruba religion in the United States. Jordan Salama has written essays on climate change, letter writing, and American Jewish life for the New York Times. Tracked down Syrian traveling salesman in the Andes, covered Lionel Messi and the Argentinian national soccer team, and produced a radio feature about a cross-country railroad trip that appeared on NPR's All Things Considered. You can find his writings in the New York Times, National Geographic, Smithsonian, and Scientific America, and more. His book, Every Day the River Changes, the story of his journey down the greatest river in Colombia, will be published by Catapult in November 2021. Andrew Blauner is the editor of our book we're featuring tonight, Now Comes Good Sailing, and creator of Blauner Books an independent literary agency founded in 1995, representing over 100 authors and books, including New York Times bestsellers and winners of the National Book Award, PEN Award, National Books Critics Circle Award, and the Pulitzer Prize. Bonner was born and bred in Manhattan, attended collegiate school, has a BA from Brown and an MBA from Columbia University School of Business. Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you to everybody, the Concord Museum, the Thoreau Society, Allison, Tom, Jody Price, everybody at Princeton University Press. I'm still sort of numb a little bit to the fact that I was given the opportunity to put this book together. I thank all of the contributors, but especially Gerald, Jenny, and Jordan for making yourself available for this and other events. I thank everyone out there for joining us here. I am the editor titularly of this book, but it's really a misnomer. I want to moderate this discussion about as much as I had to edit this book, which is to say, not much. I just want to kind of get things going and then kind of get out of the way. It's the title, before we get too far into this, as many of you, it's a very self-selected, very knowledgeable audience out there. I think probably many of you know that the title comes from the last words, or let's say the last full sentence that Thoreau is known to have spoken: "Now comes good sailing," before he died. And it was really the first piece of the puzzle. Once I could get over my profound procrastination and try to advance this project and put it into reality, the title came into mind and went into place. And just quick backstory, it was almost 18 months to the day, 18 months ago, where we were all just sort of learning what the pandemic was. It was April of 2020. And I remember casting about for another anthology idea, but kind of swearing off doing these. But thinking, as Pagan Kennedy, a terrific writer in Boston, said along the way, we're all Thoreau now. And there was something about that moment that both precluded me from, I'm a literary agent as my day job, representing writers, including Jordan. But I think probably like most of you, if not everyone, really sort of questioning life and our health and death and what to do with however much time we might all have left. And that led me, if anything, to fortify my interest in trying to make this project a reality. I had no idea if there would be a publisher who would be willing to let me do it. And I put together, admittedly, a very slipshod proposal, but that got the idea out there. And Anne Savarese is the editor at Princeton, and I wanted to just sort of acknowledge her as well. So with that, that's the backstory. And so the next step in putting a book like this together is trying to put together a tapestry of writers, of stories, to tell a story that a lot of people know or think they know, but to tell it in a relatively new way. And as is I think the genesis of the word anthology comes from, I think it's the Latin or the Greek, one of you would know this, that is from the word bouquet. So in a way, this book is my bouquet to Thoreau. And, you know, I just want to acknowledge one other thing, which is one of the barriers to getting a book like this published, and one of the stigmas, one of the inferences, is that Henry David Thoreau is a person, a subject, a life that is of interest, as I was told, primarily to older white men from New England. So it happens to be something of a coincidence that nobody on this panel, nobody at this event sort of fits that category. And that's a little bit of psychic income, psychic reward for me, to dispel that notion, not just that Thoreau was just all about Walden, but that it's, and Professor Early gets into this wonderfully in his piece, and cogently, about how the transcendence of Thoreau and how it is for all generations and for all people. So I want to do what I said I was going to do, which is get out of the way here and turn it over to the three of you. I think I'd like to ask you to either talk about what you wrote for the book, set it up however you'd like, read a brief excerpt, up to you. And if I may, I'd like to start with you, Professor Early.
Thank you. I feel very privileged to have an opportunity to contribute to this book and to be with the other writers this evening and the other writers in the book. When I decided to accept this assignment and do this, I immediately regretted it because I thought that I couldn't, because I got kind of stuck on an idea. Originally, I was going to write about Thoreau and jazz, and I wanted to write about Jack Kerouac and John Clennon Holmes and how they refer to each other as Emerson and Thoreau in their writing and in talking to each other. And I was going to talk about jazz novels that they've written and kind of connect this with Thoreau. And I couldn't work it out. It was too many moving parts. I couldn't work that out. So then I decided to say, oh, I'll do a essay on Walden and Walden 2, B.F. Skinner's book, and kind of, do a compare and contrast. I said that should be very simple and very straightforward, and it shouldn't be a problem. But that I didn't think that would be terribly interesting to people. So I turned to the third thing, which was to talk about Thoreau and Black people. But I had to figure out some kind of way of getting into it. And I hadn't thought about writing anything that was sort of autobiographical up to this point, but I knew that was the only way I could get into it. And basically to talk about my sister, who was instrumental in introducing me to the book. So that's what led to this particular essay. And I thought it would be interesting to people because I don't know if people thought very much about Thoreau and Black people. So I thought that would be kind of interesting. I thought there was a big irony in the essay in that I'm talking about Black people in nature, but it's very urban. It's set in San Francisco. It's very city driven. And what's interesting is the time I'm talking about, which is 1969, Black people have become a largely urban people. And they're probably the most urban people in the United States now. And this is, quite a transformation because 125 years ago, Black people would be considered among the most rural people in the United States and among the most folk people in the United States. And they certainly aren't that anymore. And they weren't that in 1969 when this is taking place. But Thoreau is this kind of interesting and important figure at the moment. And so it gave me an opportunity to talk about Black people in nature, and nature as a kind of state of mind. That's it. that's how I got the essay. I don't know what else would you like. Did you have another question? Or you want me to pass it along to my two colleagues here?
We can pass it along, but I have a lot of follow-up, and I think some people in the audience will have some questions. But let me just say, you are one of my go-to people when I put these books together, and you are just
I noticed
a true Renaissance person. Because again, I think I first encountered you through Ken Burns documentaries. But the more I learn, the more I realize whether it's jazz or baseball or Peanuts or the Beatles or Thoreau, I don't know what, if any of these kinds of books I'll do ever again, but I will be coming to you with whatever it is, because it is just an honor to include you, and I have such great admiration for you and your work. So we're not done by any means with you, but I'd like to come back to you, and if that's okay. And
oh, sure, that's fine. But however you want to do it, if you're very kind.
And Jennifer Finney Boylan, whose piece in the New York Times op-ed section yesterday was deeply resonant, and I feel like that's the word I use in all of my fan notes to you, which there are many for good reason. So I'd love for you to, I just wanted to mention that, Jenny, I noticed you tweeted earlier in the day about this event, and you wrote, join me and the Good Sailing crew for a talk and reading about Thoreau. My piece, If I Had Loved Her Less, is a queer reading in memoir of Walden. I will also sing the Woolite Sweater Song, discuss the burdens of school girls, and explain how I did not die. So with that, I'd like to have you take
painted myself into a corner this time, haven't I? Hey, I just want to say, I want to echo what's been said, which is how thrilling it is to be part of this project. It's an honor for me to be with Jordan and Gerald, and to speak to everyone at the Thoreau Society and the Concord Museum. I'm grateful for what all of you do, but I'm particularly grateful to Andrew Blanner, who really is a whirling dervish. I mean, Andrew gets ideas for anthologies. To call them anthologies is almost, it sounds so, I don't know, pedestrian. It's like he puts bands together. It's like he's a great conductor or a jazz musician of the 40s, and he gathers people around him and he says, this is what we're going to play. And he gets good people, and we play, and we play with each other and for each other, but we're really playing for him, because we all want to impress Andrew, because he really is the guy who makes so many cool projects happen. I had just come off of the Peanuts project, which I didn't think I was going to be part of until I kind of wrote him late in the day. I said, is anybody doing Pigpen? And Andrew was like, well, actually, I don't think. I said, okay, wait, I'm doing Pigpen. And with this, and then later you told me about you're doing this Walden project, and I'm sorry, the Thoreau project, and you basically said something like, you got anything? And I said, well, I got, one time I almost drowned in Walden Pond. But I don't think there's a whole essay in that. And Andrew said, like, fortunately for me, he said, well, think about that. So I'm going to read you a 5-minute excerpt from this piece that I wrote, which is called If I Had Loved Her Less. And I'm going to start this off just with the first 3 paragraphs, and then I'm going to jump ahead and I'll explain where we'll wind up. But here's how it starts. Tell me if this sounds familiar. I went to the city because I wished to live recklessly, to front the non-essential facts of life, and to see if I could not defy what I knew to be most true, and not, when I came to live, discover that I had never tried to die. People come to New York then, as now, to seek their fortune, but I had arrived on Veterans Day of 1980 in hopes of avoiding mine. There wasn't much doubt in my heart that eventually I'd have to come out as transgender, that in time I'd have to embark upon the path of transition and hormones and voice therapists and humiliating trips to the large size shoe store. In the meantime, I hoped I could put all of this off for as long as I could, using the antidotes available to me in the forms of invention and fury to sustain what passed, in my case, for manhood. Just be yourself, we counsel the fearful, as if that's so easy, as if being yourself is not the very thing that, once you've been unveiled, will get you murdered. Thank goodness the world has changed so much since then, and everyone is now so much more compassionate and understanding about the complex challenges in the lives of trans and non-binary people. Well, that's how it begins. The the story talks about a number of things, but one of the things it talks about is this girl that I loved, and in some ways, as before transition, she was like the cool girl, and she was like the girl I wanted to be if it was possible for me to go through transition, which I assumed it would never be. I did not know that being a cool girl took at least as much of an act of the imagination for my friend, whom I call Maeve in the story, as pretending to pull off the boy thing took for me. But here I am, 23 or 4 years old. I'm in Boston. Someone has given me, in fact, let's name names. It was John Moynihan, the late John Moynihan, the son of our then senator, who slipped some LSD into a beer that I was drinking. And then my friends announced that we were all going to go on a scavenger hunt. So we spent the day finding clues and then going to the next place that the clues suggested, in a process that in some ways reminded me a little bit about graduate school. Anyway, in the last place that we wound up was at Walden Pond. So here I am in a car with my friends going to Walden Pond. The drive to Concord took at least a half an hour, maybe more. When we got there, the dozen of us did what to us seemed like the only logical thing, which was to take off all of our clothes and dive into its peaceful waters. Thoreau called Walden Pond and lakes like it, quote, the landscape's most beautiful and expressive feature. It is Earth's eye looking into which the beholder measures the depth of his own nature. The fluviatile trees. I don't know this word. I've only written it. I've never said it out loud. Is that right? Fluviatile? If anyone knows how to pronounce that, tell me. The trees next to the shore are the slender eyelashes which fringe it, and the wooded hills and cliffs around are its overhanging brows, end quote. I did not know whether I was gazing into the pond or being gazed upon by it when I got naked. The main thing that surprises me looking back is that we were so cavalier about stripping, not only because I hated being naked, but even more so because Walden is not exactly an unpopulated public space. Were we just unaware of the likelihood we'd be busted in the altogether? Was it that we just didn't care? I don't know. My friends were better swimmers than I was, though, and before we reached the midpoint of Walden's waters, they were swimming away from me. They were all on drugs too, of course, but still, it hurt my feelings being left by those I loved to die. My heart pounded. My feet felt like Smithfield hams. I was short of breath. I got a mouthful of water, coughed, flailed a little bit. Did my whole life pass before my eyes? Did I see a swirling montage of rabbits, Melville seminars, astronauts marooned on Girl Planet? Maybe. What I remember most clearly is being scared. This is what you get for living like this, I thought. You said you wanted to live recklessly and to know what it is to try to die. Well, now you've got your wish. My head sank beneath the surface and I choked on a throatful of the sweet and peaceful water. And then there was a woman next to me in the water. James, said Maeve. Where had she come from? She hadn't been part of the scavenger hunt, but there she was. She was naked too. I stopped thrashing. The two of us treaded water for a little bit. What? I said, my voice full of tears. She looked at me with love. What? She said, and looked back at me with my own sad eyes. Just like that, I was her and she was me. You're going to be all right, I told the sad young man before me. For a few terrifying seconds, I was a cool girl, treading water. It was a lot harder than it looked. In particular, I remember that having breasts wasn't that big a deal. In my pre-transition days, I thought it would be amazing having them. But they weren't amazing, not really. They were just a fact. A few hours later, Maeve and I, along with the others, were standing in a long line at Steve's Ice Cream in Harvard Square. We were back to ourselves by then. There we stood, the dozen of us, bad playwrights, bad actors, bad guitar players, bad writers, waiting for our ice cream cones. Our hair was wet from Walden. Maeve and I looked at each other with a sense of embarrassment now that we were back on our own bodies. I think each of us had thought before the switcheroo, the other one had a pretty good deal. But now we knew better. As Dick Van Dyke had observed in Mary Poppins, life is a rum go, governor, and that's the truth. The line for Steve's went way down the block. There was a lot of talk about what kind of cone everyone was going to get when we finally arrived at the counter. There were Heath Bar mix-ins and chocolate chunks and peaches and pistachios. There were sugar cones and waffle. Some of the tubs held sherbet. I stepped up and I made my desires clear. I want a cone, please. I said, vanilla. Moynihan mocked me for this. Really living on the edge there, Boylan. But Maeve defended me. If you want a pure experience, she said, you want vanilla. A pure experience was what I wanted. Maeve and I went outside into the hot sun. Harvard students wandered around wearing Walkman, listening to new wave music. The ice cream began to drip down my hand and I licked it. It was so sweet, so cold. All right, we'll leave it there and pass the baton to the next author.
Thank you, Jenny. It's intense. I mean, your piece and Gerald's are so masterful at marrying the personal reflections, the sort of autobiographical aspects, just sort of seamlessly with the insights and the inspiration from Thoreau, or how you sort of weave it together. I'm in awe, really. So thank you for contextualizing that. And
I'll be honest, and I don't know if the other writers feel this way. It took a long time between writing this piece or being asked to write this piece and when it was edited, and now we're finally coming out. It's been almost 2 years now.
Yeah, it's just about, it's 18 months almost to the day. But I have, maybe if we have time, you can all, or any of you, talk about sort of what it was like to be writing about this subject during a pandemic.
Well, all I wanted to say is that when I looked at this piece now and when I read it now, my sense is I have no idea where this came from. How did I come up with this? I just sat down and I read. I wasn't sure if I wanted to write about Walden or about Katahdin, because I live in Maine and I've climbed Katahdin many times, but instead I wrote this, and now it's a mystery to me. Anyway, let's move on.
Thank you. Speaking of Walden, I just wanted to share, I have a shirt here that was a present from my wife that actually has Walden written, the entirety of Walden written on the shirt. I don't know if they sell that at the shop at Walden Pond. They do sell this mask, which I wanted to promote, which I highly recommend. It's upside down. And there are also Thoreau postage stamps, which can still be purchased. So now we move to Jordan Salama, who is the youngest contributor to this book, and also, full disclosure, a client as well as a friend of mine whose first book, his own first book, is coming out next month, and I hope you will all look for this. Every Day the River Changes. And he was, just as Jenny and Gerald were sort of naturals for me to go to, so too was Jordan, because despite his youth, as you would find in his piece and in all of his work, there is a depth that's uncanny for his age. And that can sound sort of patronizing, and I obviously don't mean it that way. But he brings something unique to the book. So I'm thrilled to have him in the book and also here with us. And so, Jordan, I want to turn this over to you and let you sort of do what you want with your allotted time here as far as talking about how you came to the piece or reading from it, whatever works for you.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. And also to echo what everybody else said, thank you just for inviting me. I feel particularly, I think, out of my league and just, honored to be a part of this project in all sorts of ways. And, I was trying to think about what I would write when you asked me to write about Henry David Thoreau. And to be honest, I actually didn't know that much about him when you asked me to write something about him. And this was really a learning process for me too, which was an interesting experience. I mean, I knew who he was and what he wrote, but I hadn't really ever studied him, in any way in depth. So I thought, what could I possibly write or say that could come close to living up to the expectation of a book on Thoreau? So I thought, well, he was 28 years old when he went to Walden Pond. In the grand scheme of things at that time, that was, I guess, middle-aged. But, I thought, he wasn't that much older than I am now. So what could I do that's similar to what he did in any way, try to recreate what he did, even in the smallest scale possible. And I thought that just the process of maybe figuring out a place where I could go to live away from the concerns of the world while still being in kind of an urban or semi-urban environment, because Walden Pond wasn't exactly that far from his hometown. So I, looked in my hometown. I live in the northern suburbs of New York. I grew up in the northern suburbs of New York, and there's just not that much access to nature anymore. And so what this turned in to become was maybe not necessarily a look at my own life or at the limited things that I have done, but maybe a look forward into what lessons Thoreau can have for my generation in the kind of era of climate change and disappearing nature. And so it became an essay of kind of how to fall in love with the natural world in an era of a lot of loss. Because I think it's increasingly difficult for people in their 20s or younger to really, truly fall in love with the natural world and experience it, because everywhere we look, there's just signs of destruction. You climb a mountain and you look over a forest and you think, wow, this is like one of the few that's really left in this way. Or you step in a river and you think, is this river polluted? Like, that's not something that people necessarily had to think about at the forefront of their minds all the time. So with that context, I am going to read the beginning of the piece for like 5 minutes. So you can kind of just get a sense maybe of how I went about figuring out how to write this story of Thoreau. And then if you want to kind of get the lessons that I may have taken away from it, I would encourage everybody to read all the great essays in the book and then maybe get to mine too at the end. This piece is called 24 Hours on Pea Island. Henry David Thoreau was 28 years old when he set off to live 2 years in the woods at Walden Pond. I'm 23, almost 24 now, and there's something about this age of waking up to the world, of the wide-eyed feeling of burgeoning independence that makes many people want to do the same. To live in nature deliberately away from the concerns of the world, to make sure that we can someday say that we lived it all. And that's how I came to spend 24 hours on a deserted island near New York City. Pea Island, it's called, a 5-acre spit of sand in the western Long Island Sound. Not many people even know that it exists, let alone that it's so close by. It's 10 miles as the crow flies from Manhattan and a 30-minute paddle from my hometown in the densely populated northern suburbs. I'd known about it since high school when I bought a small kayak and started spending summer mornings exploring the backwaters of the Bronx and southern Westchester, for me an otherworldly escape. Its shoreline is mostly rocks and kelp. Inland there are half a dozen scraggly trees, some weeds and shrubs. There are ruins, too, from when in 1992, a coastal storm destroyed a site of the Huguenot Yacht Club, which all but abandoned the place after that. All that's left now are some cement blocks and tall stone pilings where osprey have made their nests. Offshore, the Seahawks dive into schools of fish, emerging with prey in their claws. Long Island looms to the south, and to the west, the city skyline glitters as it consumes the horizon, as in a Hollywood backdrop. I'll admit that to call 24 hours on Pea Island living in nature would be a laughable assertion. Its beach is so littered with plastic detritus that it's hard to distinguish bits of straws and disposable cutlery from the dried kelp and seagrass. The island itself sits in close proximity to the busiest city in the world. But as much as I wanted to emulate Henry David Thoreau, my own options were limited. Thoreau's spot at Walden Pond, just 25 minutes walk from his hometown of Concord, Massachusetts, was in the 1840s still wild enough to feel removed from the commotion of everyday life. I found myself suddenly neighbor to the birds, Thoreau wrote in Walden, not by having imprisoned one, but by having caged myself near them. walked the same distance from the house in Pelham where I grew up, and it's difficult to say the same thing today. Similar ponds near me are rattled by highways, littered with plastic, trampled by joggers, patrolled by cop cars, suffocated by homes of all sides, and forever plagued by the lingering smell of a fading cigarette. All of these things feel more natural now than any wildlife. The shorelines and islands up and down our little stretch of saltwater coast are mostly colonized by houses and beach clubs, or run by cities that don't allow anyone to primitive camp on their land. Even Pea Island, a rare patch of vacant sand, is privately owned. The man who'd bought it from the Huguenot Yacht Club many years ago was a curious businessman, physician, and human rights activist named Al Sutton. But Dr. Sutton was now selling Pea as the kind of untouched backyard to a neighborhood private island mansion for $13 million. And it was Dr. Sutton, via his cheery real estate agent, Patty, who gave me permission to be there at all. Godspeed, Patty wrote. Now, I'll just add here that they thought I was the most crazy person in the whole world asking for this like tent access to this island in the middle of the Long Island Sound, but they let me go. So I'm grateful to them for that. I continue. So I set off for Pea Island one weekday in September, late in the afternoon. My kayak was weighed down by a camping tent and a sleeping bag, plus some food and all the drinking water I'd need, but the Sound was as peaceful as I'd ever seen it. The speedboats and the jet skis, for the most part, were all back at the docks. There are, as it happens, about a dozen of these little islands off the coast of New York City, each one as storied as the next, though hardly anyone seems to remember the stories anymore. To my left, to the east as I paddled out, was Huckleberry Island, the purported site of the buried treasure of Captain William Kidd. To the west, David's Island, an old military fort whose remains have long been consumed by overgrowth and trash, mattresses and refrigerator doors and rusted turbines so large that it's difficult to imagine how they got there in the first place. And as I set up camp along the south shore of Pea Island, beneath a deep and darkening blue sky, on flickered the bright white beam of nearby Execution Rocks, a lighthouse named for the legend of Revolutionary War prisoners who were chained to the rocks and left to drown with the incoming tide. This was the stuff of my dreams, to sit perched on the sand beside a small, crackling campfire, to fall asleep to the chatter of the gulls and the terns. But when I told people of my plans, only a few shared in my excitement. One of them was my neighbor Paul, a man in his 50s who grew up in the house next door. "You'll have to tell me how it is," he said longingly. He used to tell us stories from back when he was a kid, when our dead-end street looked like a couple of farmhouses in the woods. I'd like to do that myself someday. Another was my 90-year-old grandfather, who spent much of his 20s exploring the Argentine countryside on foot with just a backpack and a tent. "It's a very interesting thing you're doing," Abuelo said before presenting me with far more of his old camping tools than I'd ever need. Most people my own age didn't seem to get it. They thought it was funnier than I meant it to be, that there had to be some reason why I was making so many calls and signing so many liability waivers only to get access to a sand spit 30 minutes from home that was not much more than a pile of rocks and weeds. "I'm laughing," one friend told me a few days before I set off, "at the thought of you getting there and having absolutely nothing to do." I'll stop there, but you can kind of, hopefully sets the scene of what I tried to accomplish here, which was something that everybody thought I was absolutely crazy for, but all of the older people and kind of around me thought it was amazing. But everybody that I knew kind of laughed in my face. And so, this goes back to questions about access to nature and all these things that I end up getting into in the piece. So I guess I'll stop there. And but thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Jordan, very much. I'm just trying to think of what else, meditating on what else the three of you might have in common as far as interests. I think Jenny and Gerald, you're both from Pennsylvania originally, but one of the beauties of this is sort of finding the connective tissue and what brings people together in this book, or in shared sensibility and that kind of thing.
Well, can I ask Jordan something about what he just read?
I was just
real quickly. You said that your friends all thought you were crazy, but that an older generation seemed to think, "Oh yeah, that's a good adventure." It surprises me a little bit in that I think of my children's generation, who are like your age, as being more interested in the natural world and in saving the world and in the environment than many older people. So do you think it's just you have a particularly sarcastic group of friends, or do you think that there's something generational that I'm not picking up on?
No, I think that you're absolutely, it's totally the crux of exactly what you're saying, is that all my friends care deeply about the natural world and wanting to save it. And so do I. But I think that it's kind of become, Well, I think if I had said I was going to Yellowstone to camp in the woods, they'd say, that's amazing. Like, we love that. Can we come with you? But the fact that I was trying to do it in this place that is in no way kind of really purely natural, as we would say anymore, I think that that was where people kind of shook their head and were like, what's going on here? And I wonder kind of what that means in the piece for exploring our own backyards, especially in places where there's a lot of buildup and overdevelopment. So, but I mean, you're right. Like, yeah, there are, I think it's different for lots of different people, but I think it's really important. Obviously, the most important thing, I think there's nothing more important now than focusing on the climate crisis and saving the environment and the natural world. But I think that when it actually comes down to it, maybe fewer people than we think actually will go out and discover the natural world in their backyard. And that's for a whole number of reasons. That,
of course, I think maybe people worried, if I was your parent, I would worry that something would happen to you, either in kayaking there, or just that, you know, you're close enough to New York City so that it, you know, being in a deserted place overnight in the dark puts you at risk. And I think it's a thing. I think many of Thoreau's friends worried that he was crazy also, and that, you know, they weren't quite sure what he was doing. So it's really interesting, this question of whether or not we think of people who want to get away from civilization and embrace nature as people who are trying to live a truer life than the rest of us, or whether they're you know, whether maybe they've lost their minds a little bit. There's a moment in the piece that I wrote and that I read a little piece of about I'm thinking of the difference by gender in my daughter's high school class when they read Into the Wild, which strikes me as, you know, the story of Chris McCandless, the young man who at age 23 went off to Alaska by himself and actually died in the wilderness. I guess everyone knows that story. And in my daughter's class, the girls mostly thought, oh, he's like Thoreau. He's you know, living a bullshit-free existence. And the boys, you know, and by the way, that's the view that we get of McCandless in Sean Penn's movie of that novel. But the boys, many of them anyway, thought of him as reckless and stupid, someone who lost his life as a result of him not understanding that the wilderness is dangerous and not to be tampered with. So I wonder if some of the differences you got in your proposal to do this have to do also with whether people think leaving society is an act of truth or an act of self-endangerment. I think there was some of that same thought among Thoreau's contemporaries as well. Although we should ask Gerald, because you're the Thoreau scholar. Is that true?
I'm not a Thoreau. What gave anybody that impression?
Aren't you? Oh, I guess I've got it wrong. Sorry.
No, I'm not a Thoreau scholar at all. I don't have any particular insight about that. I was always curious about Thoreau's project because it always seemed to me to be, yes, something about going away into nature, but Thoreau is quite fixated in the book mostly on using it as a platform for criticizing society and the way society was. And so I always thought that was quite interesting. And also the fact that the book made it seem like he was more isolated than he really was in a lot of ways. He really wasn't as isolated as the book presents it. You know, he kind of made it seem more so. But I wouldn't say I was the scholar, the Thoreau scholar at all. I liked in your essay, Jennifer, when you were talking about Thoreau and the Canadian woodchopper, and that he might have had a crush on the Canadian woodchopper. And I hadn't thought about that. I thought that was pretty interesting. Because that's one of the major, there are a couple of characters in it, and that's one of them that he talks about to some great extent, as well as the family that he encounters there, and the family being a poor family, and he thinks they're making themselves poor by trying to own the land that they're on, and so forth. But I thought that relationship with the Canadian woodchopper was I thought what you brought out was very interesting.
Well, a lot of queer writers look to Thoreau as a kind of early, father figure, but he's a curious figure, and I think it's a mistake to try to read into his life with too much of our current sensibility. He was who he was for his time, but it does seem as if he had unspoken passions. It's really kind of all you can really say for certain. It does break my heart a little bit. I want to say you did such a brave thing. Okay, he didn't live completely alone for 2 years. He did take his laundry home to his mother's house or something. He did go into town now and again. But he did do a brave thing. And would it have been so much braver for him to live his life openly? Well, I guess in the early 19th century, yeah, the hell yes, it would have been not just braver, but almost unthinkable. And yet there were queer people living their lives openly during that time. So I don't know. And it's, like I said, it's a mistake, I think, to reach too much into his story to provide answers to our own lives. At least it's not a direct line, but it is an example of a way of seeking harmony, which all of us have to do. He did it on his terms, and I think all of us have to do it on our own.
Yeah. It's interesting to me as someone who just had the germ of the idea for this and knew probably as much as a layperson who read Walden in high school knew. I had no idea about any of this aspect of Thoreau's sexuality. James Marcus has a piece in the book that sort of goes deeper into that subject matter. And I didn't even know that Thoreau and his brother each proposed to the same woman. Over the years, in addition to harboring a thought to put this book together, I thought there's a great movie to be made about Thoreau's life. And for all my filmmaker friends who said, "Oh, no, there's not enough action and nothing happens," and I said, well, there's 3 acts. There's his life before Walden, there's life at Walden, and life after. And James Marcus writes also about sort of what the relationship was or might have been between Thoreau and Emerson's sister, I believe it is. And before we get too tight on time, I'd love to circle back to you, Professor Early, and have you just speak a little bit more on the sibling relationship, which was so critical and essential to Thoreau, whose brother John was his best friend, his muse, so much so that his brother developed what was called lockjaw, I guess, at the time. And Henry had such simpatico that he developed some of the same, he became symptomatic in the same way. Obviously, the trip that they took was what he went to Walden to write that book. And Gerald, if you're open to it, if you could just sort of go back into what you wrote and what you lived as far as your relationship with your sister, and if that dovetails in any way, or just speak on that a little bit as far as that sibling relationship, because it was such an essential defining part of Thoreau's life as well as your own, it sounds like.
Well, yeah, his relationship with his brother was the thing when I was reading him in graduate school was the thing that probably interests me the most about him and any of the things about his life was his relationship with his brother, and how close he was with his brother, and how his brother's death really affected him very deeply. And my sister, when I chose to write this thing, and then I got on the subject of my sister. My sister had died just a couple years ago. And so it kind of made me think about it in a lot of ways. And my primary thought was that, oh, this would give me an opportunity to write about my sister, which I've been thinking about, but I don't have to talk about her death. I can now write about her in this context with Thoreau. The reader doesn't have to know she's dead or anything. And so I was able to find a way to look at sibling relationship, which was very important to me in doing this. And I didn't want her death to get in the way of it. And I thought, oh, well, here is a way for her death not to get in the way of it, because in talking about it with Thoreau, her death had nothing to do with it. It's happened a long time before that. So then at that point, once I kind of figured that out, then that became really, really crucial to me in the writing of the essay. So in some respects, I guess I was thinking about mimicking or looking at sibling relationship. And I do mention Thoreau's relationship with his brother. And yeah, he dedicated his first book to his brother, and he called his brother his muse. And I suppose in some way what I'm doing in this essay is kind of doing something like that with my sister. And so, yeah, I thought that I would have to say that those things were all very conscious, that I did those things quite consciously.
I appreciate that. If I do another one of these kinds of books, I may have mentioned this to you, Professor. I'm thinking about a book about siblings. I did one just about brothers, but I think the brother-sister relationship in particular is sort of surprisingly unmined for different reasons.
You can call me Gerald. Okay. It's not school, man. I'm not going to give you a grade.
Okay, all right. Jenny, I just wanted to ask you also, you mentioned Patty Murphy's bar. Or is it a bar or restaurant on Amsterdam Avenue?
There was a bar. It was a bar.
Yeah, I think I'm not far from there. I'm in the middle of Manhattan here right now.
Well, I think it was on Amsterdam Avenue between 108 and 109 on the east side of the avenue. And it was definitely, there was a lot going on in there in 1981.
Okay. I mean, I assume we're talking mostly to a New England crowd, but who knows? I'm born and raised in Manhattan, but I did a book about Boston after the marathon bombings, and incidentally, I know we're coming off of yesterday was Marathon Day for the first time
and Red Sox win. And
I wasn't going to bury the lead, and a big Red Sox win. So I hope everyone's feeling good about that in Red Sox Nation. And also, Jenny, you mentioned sort of very sweetly looking out for Jordan about being in a dark place by yourself. Having grown up in New York in the 1970s, I was mugged in broad daylight on Park Avenue on a very crowded street. So it can happen almost anytime, any place. Only in New York, maybe.
Well, you know what's funny, whenever so I live in Maine. I live in a pretty remote part of Maine, and I mean there are certainly more remote parts of Maine, but I live in a small town, and I have friends from Brooklyn who are like afraid to come visit me because they just think, aren't you afraid there are serial killers in the woods? Although actually, can I mention this? Because I think, in fact, I couldn't find a way of getting this into the essay. So the place where I live is a town called Belgrade Lakes. And if I look out the window, it's dark right now, but there's a lake out to my right. And the other side of the lake, there's a little village. And then beyond that, there's a lot of forest land. And in that forest land for like 25 years lived someone known as the North Pond Hermit. Did you hear this story? This was in the news like, oh, maybe 5 years ago. So there was a man who, after a couple of years, like around 22, 23, walked into the woods here, drove his car, abandoned his car, walked into the woods and lived there for the next 25 years by himself with no electricity, and he only saw one person by accident during that whole time. And he survived by breaking into local summer homes. And he would break into them during the winter and steal all the canned goods. And he was eventually busted during a break-in. But so he was called the last true hermit. And I thought about that story when I was thinking about Thoreau, because Thoreau wasn't a hermit. I don't think he didn't want to get away from other people. He just wanted to see other people more clearly. And it's just an interesting question as to whether, when people go on a journey like this, whether it's to Walden Pond or whether it's to Pea Island or whether it's the North Woods here in Maine or Katahdin or wherever they go, are they trying to experience a purer sense, like me trying to eat that vanilla cone? Or are they on the run from something? Are they on the run from the law? Are they on the run from the crappy culture in which we're all living now? Or, and this is not a surprise, my suspicion is a lot of the time they're on the run from themselves. And whether you're maybe queer, like Thoreau maybe was, or whether you're just angry at your parents, like Chris McCandless, or, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that because I don't know what his issues were, but it's always interesting to me when someone is a hermit, are they running away to, or are they running away from? And I'm not even sure I could answer with any certainty when it comes to Henry David.
Well, it's just how people express their outrage or protest or statement. There's a guy I work with named John Francis who wrote a book called Planet Walker. And part of his protest had to do with the environment, the catalyst for it in the 60s. He didn't speak for 17 years. And that was his manifestation of a different kind of protest.
Can I add something just to say that in the time when I was writing and kind of reporting, I guess you could say this piece, it was exactly a year ago. This is to Andrew's question about, kind of what was going on in the world. And that was the time, maybe like 2 days before I went to Pea Island, was that orange picture of the Golden Gate Bridge where the wildfires had like completely over-smoked California. And a couple of days later, the smoke made it to the East Coast not in a way that it kind of really noticeably did this year, but it still was noticeable last year. And I don't know, it is a really interesting question, like why would somebody do something like that now? And I think that moment of that orange picture of California made me think, I need to go see something before, I don't know, as close as I can get to something before it's all completely gone. But there were oil slicks in the water and plastic. I don't know. I'm not articulating it well, but like there was some element of something there that I think a lot of people now especially are dealing with in the pandemic. I also noticed that around the same time, a lot of people my age were driving west in the middle of COVID, camping and doing things that they hadn't necessarily done before in nature around the same time that all of this was happening. And I really don't think that it's a coincidence. I think that it has made people a lot more conscious of kind of like our place in the world, whatever that place may be. The pandemic, and that's, I guess, what Thoreau's about too, our place in the world or whatever that might be.
Well said. I see that we're at 8 o'clock, at least on the East Coast. So Allison or anyone else, do we have any questions? I don't want to close people out if they have anything to weigh in with or ask anybody about. Are we okay? Yeah, not Not seeing any. I don't want to keep people here past the allotted time. Anything else? Any of the three of you want to add before we do sort of start to close?
I thought about the fact that the last time I'd read Thoreau was in high school, and it made me think that in some ways this is not a book for young people. I mean, it is, of course, it's a book for young people, and that it's part of our American heritage, and so it's part of what Americans should know. But I think there are a lot of books that you end up reading in high school that, well, they might speak to you in high school, but they're going to speak to you differently when you're 30 and 40 and 50, and in some cases 60. And it strikes me just in passing as a shame about how many books kind of get wrecked by junior high school English. And my memory of Thoreau is very much the memory of, you know, a humorless teacher who'd probably never been outside in his life, kind of shaking a book at me. And it was a delight for me to be able to rediscover this at a more susceptible, at a time in my life when I was more susceptible to what Thoreau had to say.
I mean, I'll just add on to that, as someone reminded me over the weekend, that part of the misperception about Thoreau is that he was sort of humorless, which the more you read, the more you learn. It was very much not the case. And there's one vignette, one anecdote, I guess, the night that he spent in jail as a protest of, I guess, the Mexican-American War. I think the story goes that Emerson went to see him and he said, "What are you doing in there?" to Thoreau, and Thoreau said, "What are you doing out there?" So he had kind of a sly, dry sense of humor. And so,
yeah,
you know,
there's when he refused to pay the, I forget what it was, $1 fee to get his degree from Harvard. He
Okay.
said, "Let every sheep keep its skin."
exactly.
I thought that's a nice line.
So Robert Sullivan, I think, is in the book, and he wrote a terrific book of his own with a great title called "The Thoreau You Don't Know." There's so much more, obviously, as all of you know, beyond the pond, beyond Walden Pond, and I'm really grateful that we were able to share some of this. And just want to thank again the Concord Museum, the Thoreau Society, all of you, everyone out there. And my wish is, as Thoreau's, maybe they were the penultimate words, maybe they were the last words, but I wish everybody good sailing and good wishes to everybody. So thank you.